Few individuals have exerted as profound an influence on modern psychology as Carl Gustav Jung. He was the one to introduce into scholarly use the notions of extroversion and introversion, archetypes, anima and animus, the shadow, and the collective unconscious. A practicing psychiatrist, Jung is considered the founder of analytical psychology, Jungian analysis. In his youth, he collaborated with Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis. They had a close relationship and jointly sought to develop a unified theory of the human psyche. However, they later parted ways because Jung's discoveries in analytical psychology, especially his idea of the collective unconscious, could no longer be reconciled with Freud's views. This rift became a painful outcome of their many years of work together. Jung's analytical psychology effectively laid the groundwork for empirical research into the psyche and culminated in his major work, The Collected Works, which he labored on for about 60 years. Jung identified three principal areas in the human psyche: consciousness, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. Consciousness encompasses all impressions and experiences that we are aware of, and it is within consciousness that the ego is formed. However, Jung emphasized that, compared to the unconscious, this realm is extremely small. The personal unconscious is unique to each of us. It comprises thoughts, memories, and ideas that we do not recognize or have repressed due to their distressing nature. By contrast, the collective unconscious is the deepest part of the psyche. It is inherited and not shaped by personal experience. Within the collective unconscious reside archetypes, universal images and behavioral patterns common to all humankind. Jung believed that we inherit archetypes in the same way we inherit instincts. Additionally, he devoted extensive study to religious and mythological symbolism. It was precisely the examination of myths and religious traditions that led him to the concept of archetypes. He observed recurring themes and symbols in the legends of diverse peoples and found corresponding images in the dreams of his patients with mental disorders. All this reinforced his conviction of the collective unconscious's existence. Jung traveled widely. Besides visiting the United States and England, he journeyed to East Africa, where he studied local tribes that had no contact with European culture. He also traveled through India, where for the first time he experienced the impact of a completely different cultural world. Hinduism, in particular, had a profound effect on him and helped him better understand the role of symbols and unconscious processes. Although Jung listed a wide range of archetypes, for example, the father, the mother, the old sage, the hero, the trickster, and others, he placed special emphasis on four main ones: the self, the persona, the shadow, and anima/animus. First, let us consider the archetype of the self. To grasp what the self is, we need to clarify how it differs from the ego, which belongs to the realm of consciousness. According to Jung, the self outranks the ego in status and significance. The ego develops over the course of an individual's life and therefore is a conscious factor. Theoretically, one can fully describe the ego, but in doing so, one would describe only the conscious part of the personality, ignoring its unconscious layers. The ego is formed from both somatic and psychic components. Somatic refers to our body, while psychic refers to the processes of the mind. Both the body and the mind contain elements that are conscious as well as those that are not consciously recognized. The principal characteristic of the ego is the sense of one's own individuality. But the ego covers only part of the personality. The remaining portion is constituted by the unconscious. The totality of consciousness and the unconscious is what Jung called the self, that is, the integrative structure of the personality. The drive to realize the self underlies Jung's concept of individuation, or self-actualization, which he regarded as the main goal of human development. This is a long-term process in which we gain an ever deeper understanding and awareness of our conscious and unconscious dimensions, striving for greater wholeness. We now turn to the elements that Jung considered to be the most significant parts of the unconscious: the persona, the shadow, and anima/animus. These are the aspects that most noticeably affect the ego. Persona, according to Jung, is the archetype of adaptation. This part of the personality arises to help a person better adapt to social conditions or operate in society to their own advantage. Essentially, it is the mask we wear in particular situations. By means of it, we present a version of ourselves that is pleasing to those around us. Everything that does not fit this idealized image goes into the shadow, what Jung called the unknown dark side of the personality. Jung defined the shadow as our dark side that remains unknown to consciousness. The contents of the personal unconscious arise in the course of an individual life, while archetypal structures dwell in the collective unconscious from the outset. Among these archetypes are the shadow, anima, and animus. But the shadow is considered the most accessible to awareness, partly because it is so closely tied to personal experience. Recognizing one's shadow requires considerable moral effort, for we must acknowledge the dark aspects of ourselves. We can perceive certain traits of our own shadow, but others can be so strong that they are barely subject to moral control. If we fail to recognize the mechanism of psychological projection, in which a person attributes his or her repressed qualities and desires to others, we begin to see the external world in a distorted way, as if it reflects our own unknown face. The shadow serves to balance the psyche, but if it is neglected, we become dependent on others' opinions and turn into a walking persona, constantly adjusting to external expectations. Those who refuse to face their shadow continually project it onto those around them. Often what irritates us most in others is what lies within ourselves, but which we refuse to acknowledge. For true personal growth, one must look at and accept one's shadow, balancing it against the persona. While many people can accept that they may be capable of bad things, very few dare to confront the absolute evil within themselves. Dreams sometimes hint at an encounter with the shadow, typically as a figure of the same sex as the dreamer. Whether the shadow is more rooted in the collective unconscious or the personal unconscious depends on the individual's experience. The dissolution of the persona and recognition of one's own shadow is the central step in individuation. In analogies like the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it is Dr. Jekyll, the conscious personality, who must integrate the shadow rather than be absorbed by it. If the shadow becomes autonomous, the individual becomes its powerless servant. Integrating the shadow is considered the first phase of the analytical process. Without it, one cannot fully perceive the anima or animus. However, even after this, the shadow remains a factor with which one must continue to work throughout life. Within the shadow, we also find two special figures, anima and animus, the so-called contrasexual images. Every man possesses an unconscious feminine aspect, the anima, which embodies feminine psychological tendencies. Every woman possesses an unconscious masculine aspect, the animus. Unlike the shadow, which is closer to the personal unconscious and thus more easily accessible to consciousness, anima and animus lie much deeper and rarely reach conscious awareness directly. The masculine anima is distinguished by the feminine principle of eros. It is more passive, like a child who seeks protection and nourishment from the mother. The feminine animus embodies logos, rationality, and logic. When a man begins to integrate his anima, it becomes a source of sensitivity and compassion. When a woman integrates her animus, it fosters a more decisive and analytical approach, granting clarity of thought. The anima frequently surfaces in dreams, visions, and fantasies as a female figure. It is a spontaneous product of the unconscious and not a substitute for the mother. Every man carries within himself feelings and experiences he never suspected until he encounters them head-on. Ordinary people tend to believe they fully know their own thoughts and emotions, But awareness of the anima shatters these illusions. A triad emerges: male subject, female subject, and the transcendent anima. In the case of a woman, the transcendent animus takes a parallel role, gradually integrating the contents of the collective unconscious, above all the shadow, anima, and animus, into one's personality through psychotherapy, introspection, and a moral readiness to revise one's beliefs can have a profound impact on a person. It strengthens our internal foundations, helps us surmount everyday difficulties, and provides a clearer understanding of who we are and how the psychic forces beyond our conscious control operate within us. In conclusion, from Jung's perspective, all these elements, persona, shadow, anima and animus, and the self, reside within every individual's psyche and form its whole structure. Following the path of individuation, we learn to accept and acknowledge our unconscious aspects, reaching deeper self-awareness and gaining the possibility of living in greater harmony with ourselves and the world around us.